is Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher. I work in the Los Angeles area. This will be my 17th year in the classroom, although not literally in the classroom since my area has some sense and we're starting the school year off fully online, but that's neither here nor there. This is All of the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. We are two lifelong educators who know, like you know, that education simply doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So we are here to help you process all that's going on with our schools today. If you are new to our show, if this is your first time listening or watching us, we want to extend a super dope, super warm welcome to you. We hope you enjoy what you see. If so, do consider hitting that subscribe button or that thumbs up or whatever might be there on whatever app you're watching this or listening to this on. And so Jeff, man, there's a lot going on in the world of education right now. We have a fully packed agenda, I'm sure. Can you break it down for us? What are we going to learn today?
Well, I'd be happy to, Manuel. We got a good one, as usual, for folks. And, there's a topic in the world that I feel like is permeating every aspect of our national discussion about education right now. And that's the work of anti-racism, right? And it seems like everybody and their mom is out there, buying a copy of this and that book, attending an online seminar, trying, and hopefully this is a good sign for us as a nation, trying to figure out how can we make our schools an anti-racist institution. And so we have two incredible guests coming on today who are going to help us explore that through the lens of the outstanding work they've been doing at their school site in Minneapolis. Minneapolis being, of course, the kind of epicenter of our national uprising around police violence and anti-Black racism more generally. So we have two guests. We have Leonard, we have Arielle Rocca, who work at the Community Connected Academy, which is a academy within Patrick Henry High School in Minneapolis. So we're going to talk about doing anti-racist work and what this looks like at their school. It's going to be dope, man. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Man, I love the name, Community Connected Academy. That alone, that's already transformative when you think about the names of so many other academies out there. Community Connected, can't go wrong by connecting with the community, but definitely looking forward to hearing more from them about their work and their school there for sure. But up first, we have the Do Now, where we take a look at recent headlines in the world of education. Stay tuned. AOTA family, we could really use your support. We're looking at the ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts, and we have a good amount of ratings, but we need some more reviews. So if you open up the Apple Podcast app and pull up our show and scroll down to the bottom, leave us 5 stars and write a short review for us, we will send you back a AOTA show sticker for your laptop or for wherever you put your stickers. So send us a screenshot of your review and we'll send you back an AOTA show sticker. You can send that screenshot to our Gmail, allaboveshow@gmail.com, or just DM us on Facebook or Twitter. Thank you. All right, folks, we're back, and now it's time for the Do Now, where we take a look at recent headlines in the world of education. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, it is, I think, a topic that's on everyone's mind, which is engaging students and families. We haven't seen them since March, Manuel, so we got to take attendance. We got a roll call today. We got to see who's here.
That is true. That is true. In this distance learning era, attendance has been a whole thing in terms of how different districts are trying to measure it and all that. But yeah, let's do a roll call, Jeff. First up on our attendance sheet is the Black and brown kids.
Oh, man. See, I should have known coming from you. Everything's got to be about race, man. Well, it's mad racial. I mean, obviously, the more we talk about it, the more it's a problem in our society. If we just stop talking about it, we can move on. Yeah, exactly.
But unfortunately, we can't just move on because race is still a very, very real thing here in these United States of America. And this first story has to do with student engagement during distance learning back in the spring. This first story comes from the LA Times by some good reporting by Paloma Esquivel and Howard Balloon. And they report that more than 50,000 Black and Latinx middle and high school students in Los Angeles did not regularly participate in distance learning when schools closed last spring. These numbers come via a report by the LA Unified School District's Independent Analysis Unit, which looked at the activity of middle and high school students within the Schoology learning platform. This is the district's central learning management system where digital student engagement, including Zoom sessions, is housed. And the report looked at activity from March 16th through May 22nd. According to the report, some students simply logged in and did little else. Others only viewed their work, and those whom the report described as quote-unquote participating were students who submitted work, took tests, posted on discussion boards, or created some sort of messages within the platform. And nearly every category of students, by race, income, learning needs, had large numbers who didn't regularly participate in distance learning. But low-income students and Black and Latinx students showed participation rates between 10 to 20 percentage points lower than their white and Asian peers. Specifically, among Latinx and Black students, the peak weekly participation rate was about 67% for middle school students and between 71 to 73% participation rate for high school students. White students' weekly participation peaked at 88% for middle school students and 85% for high school students. And among Asian American students, it was around 90%. The report also found that on any given day, an average of about 36% of middle and high school students participated online. About 25% logged on or viewed work, and about 40% were completely absent on any given day. Jeff, what do you make of these numbers?
Well, what can you make of these numbers, right? Like, they're disappointing. They're, unacceptable as we move forward with resuming school this fall. And they're also not at all surprising, right? I do want to give some credit to the district, to the Los Angeles Unified School District, for one, gathering data, sharing the data publicly. I think in unprecedented circumstances, right, where we just were not prepared to have to completely reinvent school and do it online. What was revealed before us was, even more granular detail about the extent to which our society creates very inequitable living situations for people that then will only further exacerbate inequities when we're talking about having learning taking place from home rather than at least some, assumed general common starting place of being at the school building. So I think, the data kind of speaks for itself, right? Like, the fact that on a good day, 20% of kids were not participating is concerning. The gaps that exist here, I think, are predictable. They're the kind of gaps that we see in every aspect of our society that have to do with poverty, that have to do with structural racism, that have to do with, in this particular case, the fact that we live in just a really backward society when it comes to thinking about access to high-speed internet, right? In this day and age, if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's that quality internet access is actually not much different in terms of the extent to which everyone needs it than, say, water or electricity or gas or, the basic utilities everyone has in their home, right? And so, we need to start thinking, I think the data tells us we need to start thinking differently about supporting families, because we are, although I think, going to be better positioned this fall than we were, certainly kind of caught with our pants down in March. But the reality is we need families to have the resources and infrastructure they need at home in order for there to be a quality learning environment at home. And so far we've seen limited and quite frankly inadequate investments from the telecommunications companies and from government and from philanthropy to like put band-aids on the problem, but it's not enough. And it's certainly not going to be enough if we, knowing that we're starting virtually in the fall, and frankly, we might be in that situation for the entire school year and maybe another school year to come after that until we actually have a vaccine. So a lot of stuff there, Manuel. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely a lot of stuff, and definitely, to your point, not surprising. And actually, that reminds me of the discussion we had some time ago about standardized. It might have been the last full episode, I don't know, about standardized testing and whether or not that's going to fade away during this pandemic. And you made the point that it's a very important tool for us to help measure the areas where we're definitely failing our Black and brown kids. And I said something about do we really need the tests to know that we're not serving our Black and brown kids correctly? And this is one of those reports where I didn't need to even read the details before knowing that here's yet another gap. And in this case, Black and brown students, for one reason or another, not engaging to the same level in this distance learning experiment as their white and Asian peers. And I think holistically that speaks to just in general, obviously the marginalization within our society and just the school system not being built in such a way that our most marginalized families can access it, especially in the distance learning context. Because a lot of these students who weren't engaging, a lot of them across Los Angeles became sudden babysitters and caretakers and essential workers for sure. And the LA Unified report doesn't go into why students didn't engage, but the LA Times article does talk to teachers about their observations around engagement. And one thing that was said that I want to definitely touch on right now, because I know somebody watching this or listening to this is thinking, oh, they didn't engage because they found out that their grades can't go down. In the report, some teachers speak about even their high achieving students in AP classes, and one student in particular who was on track to be valedictorian just stopped engaging after a couple weeks. And if those students stopped engaging because of their grades, I think that itself is a mark of humongous failure in our school system to help students see the value in their learning beyond just doing it for the grade. So if it's true that certain students disengage because their grade couldn't go any lower during distance learning per the district's policy, then that's a mark of failure on all of us teachers for failing to help students see the value in or failing to provide value in our instruction to students beyond just like do it for the grade. And one thing that wasn't mentioned in the story, but that I've thought about quite a bit in just thinking about what students I didn't hear from as distance learning went on, was just the amount of actual mental fatigue among students dealing with this pandemic and dealing with the economic crisis and their family members being laid off and all the challenges around that. I think it was much more and continues to be much more difficult on students' social, emotional, mental well-being than we are talking about. And I think that's a really, really big factor in this distance learning pandemic experience that we're not really talking about. Just the struggle that certain students have had just to like get up each day and even care about schoolwork and engage in it, given all that's going on in the world. I think that's underspoken about. I just made something up. I think that's underappreciated
that's a good word.
Yeah, that's what we do here. We just make up words, man. Just throw some stuff together. It works out,
right.
and people know what I'm trying to say. In any case, we need to talk about that more and explore that a lot more, because we have another semester, perhaps it looks like, of distance learning, and we can't let this continue, this gap between students engaging and students who are not.
Yeah. I would just throw in one more thing, Manuel, because I appreciate what you said there. And I think the problem is actually even a little bit worse than you're naming, from the standpoint of the intersecting nature of race, poverty, housing, geography, healthcare, pandemic, right? Yeah. And then you layer on top of that, like the environmental racism and inequities we have in our society. So right here in LA, Manuel, we have communities. So that, the LA Times piece is giving us district-wide data, right? So we have, X percent of students who just didn't engage, right? We know for a fact that percent is not like, well, every school had 20% of kids who just never engaged, right? We know that there are communities within the city of Los Angeles, right? There are neighborhoods that essentially are like Wi-Fi service dead zones, right? where very few of the service providers actually provide service.
Which is crazy. This is Los Angeles. This is like a giant city. That's crazy that any corner
one
of
of the wealthiest cities in the world, right? Right. And so the providers who do provide access stepped in and they gave all these like temporary short-term plans, 60 days of free service and this and that, right? 20 gigs of data. But you know, if kids are Zooming, if you have multiple kids Zooming all day, 20 gigs of data will get you through maybe a week of school, right? So there's all kinds of things that created barriers, right? Because of poor infrastructure, right? And then these are the same communities that have a higher percentage of parents who are considered essential workers, who have to go to work, who are put at higher risk of contracting COVID, who have the least quality access to healthcare, who are breathing the dirtiest air in our very dirty air city, right? So like you layer all this stuff on top of one another, and what this data, which is, you know, important, and I'm glad they wrote this article, and I'm glad the district's collecting it, right? But this is kind of an academic exercise that is just surfacing the ways in which the inequality and racism that's baked into how we do everything here is so deep, right? It manifests in every aspect of our life, and this is just, you know, showing us one slice of that.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of y'all that are learning about systemic racism, this is what it looks like. These black and brown kids who aren't engaging in this report, it's not because they individually, you know, don't care about their future outlooks or anything. They care about their future and their livelihood just as much as every student. But as Jeff just explained, the piling on of all these different systems and all these different inequities, man, it's a wonder. Sometimes it's a wonder that any kid gets through that. Man, that's not a very, very uplifting story. Can we get something uplifting here?
Probably not. Just keeping it real with you, Manuel. But okay, so our next story here is an interesting one, Manuel. I am very intrigued to get your reaction to this story in particular. So next up on our roll call, Manuel, is the U.S. Army.
U.S. Army. I struggle to see how this could be an uplifting story, Jeff.
So do I. But let's get into it nonetheless. So this story comes to us actually from kind of an amalgamation of good reporting across a few publications. So we have Jordan Yule from The Nation. We have Jason Murdoch from Newsweek and Matthew Galt from Vice News. All did some good reporting recently on this just crazy story, man. So turns out that the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force have been investing in esports teams that use popular online gaming channels like Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, as a recruitment tool. Now, this might come to a surprise to a lot of folks because, one, you might not know what Twitch is if you're not of a certain age, and two, you might be thinking, well, like, is that even legal? Is that okay? So yes, it is, and it is happening pretty aggressively. So Twitch, which is, you know, for those who aren't familiar, you might think of it as kind of like YouTube that watches people play video games and talks about what's happening in the video games. And Twitch boasts that it can reach 80% of teen males in the United States. The minimum age requirement for engaging in Twitch is 13, though I'm not sure what kind of policing exists to make sure that no one younger than 13 engages. And on Twitch, people watch members of the military, along with, you know, millions of other people. But in this case, members of the military play military-themed video games such as Call of Duty or Apex Legends, and have the opportunity to see and interact with other participants and players in the chat stream. In mid-July, the Army's channel made some news for how it began responding to users who brought up questions about the American military's history of committing war crimes. There were a few incidences of participants bringing up questions about things like the My Lai massacre or the Kunduz hospital airstrike, who were getting banned from these Twitch channels. Now, the practices employed on Twitch by the military are part of a system by which recruiters target children in unstable and or disadvantaged situations. So we probably all have, you know, seen military recruiting stations around our cities. This is kind of a virtual version of that. And, you know, the recruiters take advantage of the poor seeking steady income. folks who are vulnerable, longing for stability and community, and even undocumented folks living in fear because of their citizenship status. And now at a time when all those factors are magnified by a pandemic that has left about half the country out of work and over 30% unable to afford housing payments, the conditions are perhaps even more ripe for recruiters to prey on anxious youth. So the combination of the kind of censorship of critique of the military and military recruiters using these, popular teen hangouts of video game esports channels on Twitch has a lot of people talking, raises some concerns for folks about what is happening there. Manuel, what's your take on this?
Yeah, this is wild. This is one of those stories where I wish we were back in the original TV studio where we first started, because one of our student helpers back then, shout out to Carlos, he's a big time gamer on Twitch. Like that's what he does. And I would love to get his take on this. And I wonder if he's come across any of this. This is crazy, but it's not surprising at all. I mean, the idea that military recruiters will be lurking in these video game streaming channels and trying to recruit folks from that. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, honestly, if I was a recruiter and if I didn't quite care about anything related to morals and ethics when it comes to recruiting folks for the military, I would think to go there, because there are a bunch of guys there, just like Twitch says, 80% they have, or they claim to have the ability to reach 80% of young males. So there's your target demographic, and they're playing video games. And a lot of these video games, many of them on Twitch especially, are ones that glorify or have militaristic themes to them. And why wouldn't you go there to try to get some recruits? It's terribly sad, because we have parents who are out there working or doing whatever, and unbeknownst to them, their child is playing video games with somebody who is gently trying to condition them over to this Army recruitment website or wherever so that they can sign up. That's really, really, really disturbing. It's also disturbing that one would think to look at video games and video game players as potential for to be military recruits, because of course these video games, they might be fun and all that stuff for those who play them, but I mean, the real war is not that at all. And it's kind of sickening to think that someone might be playing a game that they feel like it's fun, and that might end up leading them on a path to real actual military where it's not fun at all. And part of me also wonders if this is perhaps compensating for the fact that more and more schools and more districts are turning their backs to military recruiters. I feel like growing up in the 90s, having military recruiters at your campus was just like a normal thing. And now, more and more teachers that I talk to in schools that I learn about, more and more of them are like, no, we don't allow recruiters here. I don't let my classes sit there and listen to recruiters. So I wonder if this is, compensating for the fact that it's harder to make inroads through the traditional, showing up at a school type of way that, might have been easier back in the day. I don't know. I could be definitely wrong about that. I'm just curious about it. But yeah, it's really, really, it's gross to think a parent might be, taking care of household duties and their kid is playing video games, and the parent just has no idea that this recruiter is trying to get the kid to go over to this website and put in their info for, a free Xbox controller or whatever. And that info is being used to, hit them up as potential recruits. That's really sickening to me, that thought.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. I have never been a fan of military recruiting. I find it predatory. It's very clear that they target low-income areas. It's very clear that they target poor Black and brown folks. It's very clear that they target immigrants and people who are the most marginalized in our society, and take advantage of the fact that we live in such an unfair and unequal society that there are people who feel they have no other option for a stable job, to escape the violence in their community or whatever it may be, but to go into the military. Now, I don't pretend that the military has not been helpful to many individuals, and that there's an other side to that coin. This is my take on the matter, and I have never been a fan of military recruiting in this way, and find it very exploitative. I will say that, you just mentioned this, right? The part of what they were doing was also these shady fake promotions, right? So offering, click here for this free Xbox controller that's worth $200, and actually it wasn't a sweepstakes, right? It was just a way to get kids info, and then a recruiter will call you, right? And they did several different things like that, doing these fake promotions that actually just get kids placed into a recruitment situation, to the point that Twitch actually demanded that the Army stop doing that on its channel, right? So they're violating Twitch's terms of service, and I think actually even the law around offering prizes and like conducting a sweepstakes without actually offering those prizes, right? So certainly they're behaving unethically on that level, and I think in general, this just it tastes to me like exploitation. It tastes to me like sort of trying to find vulnerable kids in places where they're ostensibly alone and can be preyed upon, and not that different than the kind of behavior that like a child predator uses. Now, I'm not saying the military sexually abusing kids, but look at the behavior pattern, man. It's like a similar kind of behavior pattern. Let's find you, let's help you deal with feeling vulnerable or whatever, and then instead we're gonna take advantage of you, right? So I don't like it. I think it's shady, and I hope the news gets out and we are protecting our kids from what to me feels like a predatory environment.
My dad had a long career in the military. I've had students who joined the military after high school and have loved it. I've had some who have enlisted and didn't love it. And I'm not against the idea in general of sharing information with students about the opportunities of joining the Air Force or Army or whatever. But I am fully against doing it behind parents' backs, for sure. I know when I log into my LMS at school, there's a little like indicator there on whether or not the parent has consented for that student to be contacted by recruiters or something like that. I know that, those parents who say no, and almost all of the students whose info I look at, like it says no in terms of sharing info with recruiters. I'm sure those same parents don't really know that some of those recruiters are also lurking in these online gaming platforms. So that to me is the really unethical part, trying to condition these kids without their parents even knowing. That's the part where it's just like, red line, can't do that. That's fully trash. Man, Jeff, you promised me an uplifting story. I'm pretty sure you promised me an uplifting
sure
story.
didn't. You asked for one, and I told you probably not. So let the record show. Yeah.
All right. So that's it for today's Do Now. And up next, we'll have the seminar with some very dope educators who will share about their academy in Minneapolis, where they do some really dope work with their students and stay connected with the community. So that's up next. Stay tuned.
Hey there, AOTA family. We are so appreciative of your support, for being a listener, a viewer of our show, and we know many of you are looking for ways to help support the show. It's super easy. All you have to do is go to aotashow.com/support. That's aotashow.com/support. And right there, you can find ways to contribute on Venmo or on Cash App. We're at AOTA Show. Or you can click through to Anchor and you can become a monthly subscriber. So help support your favorite unstandardized take of education that's out there. We really appreciate it. Also on our website, you're gonna find a way to buy new AOTA Show merch. You can walk the streets of your town repping for the All of the Above family with your own t-shirt, with a coffee mug. We got all the exciting stuff. You definitely wanna be able to share the good news with everybody out there. So again, go to aotashow.com/support. Click on that button to buy yourself some new merch. Thanks, and we'll see you soon. All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. We are so excited to have you with us today. We have two incredible guests here who are going to help us explore, I think, one of the biggest questions that's on everyone's mind, not only in education, but generally in society nowadays, but really just grappling with this issue of what would it look like to make schools anti-racist institutions, right? Institutions that not only serve communities well, but work to intentionally undermine the negative effects of systemic racism in our society. And who better to help us explore these issues than two amazing educators from the city of Minneapolis, the sort of epicenter of our current national and even worldwide, state of unrest against the status quo. So I want to welcome to our show our two guests. We have Arielle Rocca and we have Alex Leonard coming to us both from Community Connected Academy at Patrick Henry High School in Minneapolis. Welcome, Arielle. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Alex Leonard and Arielle Rocca are educators and co-founders of Community Connected Academy at Patrick Henry High School. That's in North Minneapolis. Alex is a counselor in the academy, integrating social emotional learning into the everyday curriculum the students experience. And Arielle teaches a college and career class and coordinates personalized internships for CCA students. Now, the Academy is a close-knit community bringing to life the school's mission that provides opportunities for students to learn and grow through meaningful, relevant, real-life learning that contributes to a just and healthy North Minneapolis community. Alex and Arielle, along with their team, work in deep relationship with their students and families to create an academy that removes barriers to future learning and life opportunities and prepares students for the demands of leadership and justice. So Arielle and Alex, welcome again to All the Above. So excited to have you here. And I do want to say full transparency to our All the Above audience. Alex and I have known each other since we were about 5 years old. And I've been plotting on a way to get him on the show here for most of the last 3 years, and it finally happened. So, Alex, appreciate you being with us today and helping to make the connection so we can also have Arielle with us. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Manuel for our first question.
Yeah, so thank you both for being with us. I've heard nothing but great things. And no pressure, but we really expect some dopeness today because I know you're two really dope educators that are out there in the field. And we have a long-standing tradition on this show of only inviting dope educators to come speak with us. So welcome both to the show. And I guess I want to start with just the fact that y'all are both at the epicenter of this national uprising, of this global uprising, really. I mean, we've seen folks marching for Black lives all around the world now, and it all at least this particular moment all started specifically with that video that we saw coming out of Minneapolis and the protests in Minneapolis and all that has transpired since then. So I guess I want to start with just asking, how are you and your school community holding up now?
Yeah, I think, myself and the school community, I think we ended the school year in a bit of survival mode, in all honesty, and just kind of triaging where we could, I live in North Minneapolis, and there was a lot happening over here in our community. And so just trying to figure out how to support students, how to kind of keep students and families at the center with everything that was going on was definitely challenging. But I think we did our best in terms of responding and but it was a lot of survival, just kind of getting through it and trying to support one another as best we could. We had students out on the front lines. I'd see them in videos as we were kind of watching things that were unfolding. And then in North Minneapolis, dealing with the type of elements that were coming into the community. A lot of families were faced with, honestly, some kind of terrorism from folks outside, a lot of intimidation and things happening overnight, oftentimes. So, connecting and expecting students and families to be focused on school at a time like that is a huge ask. And so trying to support them as best we could while also honoring just what's going on and respecting that as much as possible. I think personally we did a great job in CCA and as a school community, but it is definitely challenging.
And we have juniors and seniors in our academy. And so honoring our seniors with graduation, tying up loose ends. I know Alex was a big part of making sure that students were, graduation ready. And I think we also wanted to just make sure that social emotionally, we had spaces for students virtually where they could connect with us, just to talk about what was going on. So we also created those spaces knowing that our families and students were on the front lines, while at the same time elevating their voices. So.
Yeah. Now, I happen to follow Alex on social media, so I've had the privilege of seeing some of the videos that you guys took of going around in kind of a caravan to all the students' homes and helping to make the end of the high school experience special for kids in the midst of the pandemic and the uprising. Which I can only imagine must have been a surreal experience on a lot of levels. But also know that your school is a school that has a real sort of distinct way of being. And I'm wondering, and maybe we'll start with you, Arielle, if you can tell us a bit about, the Community Connected Academy and kind of what your model is, what makes your school special, how is it different from maybe what folks might think of as kind of traditional school?
Sure. So I think the most special part about CCA, it was actually something we ran 2 years ago, was a portrait of a graduate. So we asked our students, families, and community members to come out to an event and tell us what they wanted education to look like for their children. And so from that, we created our mission, vision, and values, and every decision that was made from then till now has been because of that moment, asking our families and students what they wanted. So we created our pillars and belief statements out of that event. And out of that was, we integrate SEL really well into the curriculum. We have an in-house counselor. We wanted to make sure that the caseload for Alex was lower than most counselors in the district, where it could be upwards of 250 students per counselor. And we wanted to integrate that into the curriculum with circles, one-on-ones, making sure that students' voices were heard. We also do interdisciplinary thematic units, which is super dope. We have a great team of educators that create projects that are integrating skills. So all of those soft skills, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, communication, all of those soft skills that are needed for 21st century, jobs and learning and in the world now. We integrate those, and then they're all interdisciplinary based on themes. So our first unit is always identity. We want to make sure our students know who they are, and who their family is, what their passions are, and then we move on to different themes that are across all 4 disciplines. So we have conflict, power, and then we obviously didn't finish out the year this year, so we didn't have a fourth quarter unit. And I think the dopest part about CCA that students love the most is getting out of the building into their internship. So a big piece of CCA is real world learning based on who they want to be, what profession, where they want to go. And so we have individualized, personalized internships for students. And a couple of the big places, North News, we have 4 or 5 students that write for a local newspaper. They get to choose what they want to write about. They learn the basics of journalism and then are published. And so we have a couple of articles that are written by CCAers at North News. We have Juxtaposition, one of our students, they created DEM benches, which is they learned how to make outdoor furniture and learn the principles of design, and then created benches, which are super cool. So there's just based on students' passions and interests, they get to choose an internship of their choice. And we integrate all of those skills and content into those internships. So it's super, super cool. Yeah. So those are some of the pillars of our program that I think make us unique.
I think I would add that I think when it comes to, because we're specifically focused on project-based learning, and that is something that doesn't typically happen with the demographic of students that we're working with. Our school is 50% African American and probably 35% Asian. And typically what we see is project-based learning is happening in kind of more in white communities and more affluent white communities. So for us, that's another, and we're in a public school setting also, and it doesn't always happen in public schools. So I think a lot of those things distinguish with what we're doing, not only in the public school setting, but also even what's happening nationally. We're doing some things that aren't typically trending nationally either.
Dope. So this summer, there's probably the official word in education, which is quote unquote anti-racist. That is becoming a buzzword, and maybe that's a good thing that more folks are talking about it. But then, of course, when certain ideas and concepts become buzzworthy, then they get misused quite a bit. And with so much going on between the pandemic and uprising for racial justice and just the economic uncertainty that we might be facing, what does an anti-racist school actually look like? Like, if that's going to be our focus, and that's what a lot of folks are calling for in the education system right now, what do y'all think that actually looks like, and what do you think needs to happen in order for us to really achieve an anti-racist school?
Yeah, so I think in order, that's a great question. It's a difficult question. I think I responded back to Jeff earlier this week, like, man.
We need a quick answer, man. People, they just want to knock this out real fast, man. Just tell them how to be anti-racist.
Yeah,
real
man,
quick.
we need the checklist that we can then just check off and make sure we're done before the year starts,
So I'm gonna give my stab at it. I think in order for schools to be anti-racist, there's a lot of steps that need to be taken, and they need to be taken at every single level of education. And so that would be from the classroom, curriculum, teacher training and preparation, and teacher evaluation, on up to administration, districts, and state departments of education and policy. Like, you're not going to be able to just do this on an individual level, on an individual school level. There are some steps that you can take, but in order to really create the kind of systemic change that I think is being called for, it has to really happen on every single level of education. And I think the biggest piece that the work would need to include is honestly decentering whiteness. And so in our community, what that looks like may be different from what that looks like in other communities. Other communities may need to focus on I think everyone needs to focus on a broader narrative, a multiple narrative that they're teaching from. I think we need, and in order for that to happen, I also think we need a lot more autonomy. Schools need the autonomy to do some of these things. And that's how you start to see this connection between policy and state and all of these things, right? And I think it's going to take a lot of work to get everybody on the same page. But I think some of it starts from communities. So in our community specifically, getting back to how we functioned as CCA and going out into the community and hearing what the needs are, that's a piece of it. What does the community need? What does the community want to see? And let me see, schools being reflective of the demographics of their the teacher demographics, being reflective of the school's demographics of students, I think is important. I think evaluating teachers from an equity lens, that's something that needs to be included. Equity, cultural competency, that's something that needs to happen. I think students and families having some sort of say over these evaluations, also having a way to hold schools and school systems and teachers accountable is important. And then, at the risk of ruffling some feathers, I think taking a hard look at teachers' unions and what role do teacher unions play. We really need, I'm pro-union, but the union needs to not be an impediment towards this work also. And so that decentering whiteness work needs to be done within teachers' unions as well. And we need to do a better job at not protecting bad teachers, right? We're here in the epicenter where we're talking about defunding police and addressing and getting rid of bad apple cops. We need to be doing the same thing with bad apple teachers. And so that autonomy that needs to be created and allowing leaders of schools and districts to do what they need to do in terms of clearing out some of these teachers that are an impediment to progress. People need to be freed up to be able to have that kind of power. I'll let Ari speak a little bit to curriculum, because that's another piece as well, but that's kind of my take on things.
Yeah, and just to build off of what Alex just said, in addition to schools addressing all the elements within the system of education, I think schools need to be responsive to systems that also intersect with education and affect our students and families. For example, and I'm going to give you an example of a student that we had. So we know that a lot of the essential workers were Latinos and Black students and families across the country. And that's obviously a product of a racist system. And so Minneapolis had the opportunity to alleviate that undue harm and stress on families by potentially providing flexibility or, getting rid of some of the undue stress. And here's a concrete example: credit recovery, online credit recovery, and makeup. The district could have, created flexibility for our seniors, and they didn't. And students that were essential workers ended up failing online credit recovery, not graduating, and needing to finish during summer school, which is just like whack. It's crazy. And so it's not just within education. We have to also be responsive to systems outside of our, not out of our control, but outside of the realm of education, what we traditionally think of education, to be truly anti-racist, I think. So that was just building off of what Alex said. But in addition, I'm, a mass overhaul of the curriculum. We were talking about this yesterday. The standards, I'm just like, some of the standards, they just have to go. And I think at the very least, redefining them, what's important to the community, what skills are important. It's been the same old in Minneapolis for a really long time and across the country. And so we really need to look at the curriculum, switch it up to be more relevant, to have and decenter whiteness. I think we have to do that within our curriculum as well. And create multiple narratives like Alex said. I think typically in curriculum we have one story that defines a whole group of people. So we really do have to introduce multiple narratives and voices into the curriculum. And I guess, I'll comment on, for our context, a profile of a graduate going out into the community and asking, what students and families want was important in our context. But I think that is very different for a school maybe in Wayzata, where it's a school that serves white families and white students. I don't think you necessarily can go out in the community and ask, what do you think is best for children? Because I think that you're going to create the same old, right? With whiteness at the center and a lot of the the violent white culture that persists in our country. And so I was brainstorming with Alex and his wife yesterday about, decentering whiteness, redefining what it means to be white, taking on a liberation curriculum to include counter narratives. All of this work needs to happen, not just only in our school, but also in predominantly white schools that serve white families and white students.
Yeah, I really appreciate both of your words there, and the immense nature of that challenge, right? And Alex, as you were talking about some of the issues of, we're very comfortable at this point, I think, in our society naming that's a racist cop, right? That's a quote bad apple, and that person should be fired, right? And yet, just the other day, Professor Tyrone Howard from UCLA published a piece out here in California in a local education publication, essentially saying what you're saying, right? That we can ask kids in communities, who are the racist teachers, right? And they could tell us. And yet the system not only doesn't do anything to address that issue, but we have pretty profound structures in place to preserve that person's ability to continue to practice, right? And that's just the most, sort of flagrant kind of example, right? Let alone all the things that I think are more, kind of institutionalized, the way that you're naming, Arielle, about, just what's baked into the curriculum and what our sort of white gaze is on the whole enterprise of education. And that presents just such an immense challenge. I'm wondering, as folks who are part of a small community, right, within a school community, if maybe there's some things you could share about some of the ways you have actually gone about trying to decenter whiteness, some of the ways you've gone about trying to, put maybe a different construction of what's important in front of the staff and the students in your school.
Yeah, I think for us, it started with hiring, right? So we have 7 staff members in our program, I think, and 4, 5 are staff of color, and so then that was intentional, right? We have to be intentional about what we're doing, right? We are intentional as we recruit students. We want our program to be reflective of the demographics of the building. So that means, initially we weren't set up to serve special ed students, right? So our first group, we really didn't have more than 1 or 2 students. Now that we're fully insulated, we're picking up and looking at how to better serve our SPED and our EL students. But we want our demographics to be reflective on a student basis also, right? And it just requires a level of intentionality, right? You have to be intentional about targeting and hiring and the whole process. You really have to be intentional within that process. On the curriculum level, I mean, we spoke to what we feel strongly about. Students need identity is big, right? How they see themselves. That's not something that typically gets addressed in the classroom. Power, having these conversations, and how do you address power through science and math, right? Like, so we're taking on these things to largely to demonstrate. A lot of what we've done in creating this program is to demonstrate and model for other schools and teachers in our building that this can be done, right? It requires work and a lot of intentionality, but it's not impossible. And we have to stop acting as if it's impossible. Where there's a will, there's a way, but we have to question, are you willing, right? Is this a skill thing or a will thing? And it's cool. If you don't have the skill, great. We can work on that. But if it's a will thing, now we're having a different conversation, right? We all have to have the desire to see this happen, right? But we're willing to work with anybody if it's simply a skill thing. But the will thing, that's different. That's a personal thing. And we're trying to do our part to demonstrate that this is possible, and hopefully we inspire other folks in the building. And I think we have. One thing, even from you all, we used Manny's piece on passing students. We passed
team all A's in the building.
Yeah, we did that in our program, right?
That's what we wanted.
We did that in our program, and we used that to try to push the rest of the building for the same thing. And our principal tried to push it on the district level, and it only got as far as credit, no credit. But we feel like that's not enough, right? It's not enough why should we do pass fails? Give everybody A's, assume that everyone's doing their absolute best in this situation. So, so that's a little bit of what it looks like. I mean, these are difficult conversations, and there's probably more we can say and aren't exactly hitting on, but those are a few of the things that we're attempting to do within our space and within our locus of control.
And that's all great. I mean, sorry. Go ahead.
You go. I was just gonna say that I also think that people say this, they do it all the time, but I do think that we listen to students every quarter, and we do a survey. We have a focus group, and we take their feedback and we pivot. We're responsive to what our students want, what's working for them, what isn't working. And we literally have shifted a ton of a ton of systems, policies, procedures based on what our students have told us about how they learn best. That's all I was going to say.
All right. So I appreciate all that y'all have shared. And, if I take a look around at the PD offerings this summer that I keep seeing pop up here and there, it looks like a lot of folks are looking for sort of like quick fixes to become anti-racist and to decenter whiteness. And what y'all have laid out really is the fact that this is a really big, comprehensive undertaking that schools and school systems need to embark on if they are really about this work and if the will is there, as you said. But we have a lot of folks who are listening to the show who are district leaders and who are administrators of various levels, and they're wondering how can they get started in trying to develop a learning community in a school similar to what you all have been working on. So what would you say to district leaders and administrators about trying to create the sort of learning environments that y'all are part of?
You want me to start, or you want to start, Ari?
You can start, Alex, if you want.
I guess I would say it starts with being just a strong leader. And I think we've seen a dearth of that in education. So who's willing to go out and just be the courageous voice that is calling for these changes and modeling these changes? And I think we're fortunate enough to be in a situation where I've been under two principals that were very forward thinking and had no problem being courageous and stepping out. So I think it starts again with that will and those leaders who really want to foster and create and take on those courageous conversations and blaze a trail, right? You have to be willing to be that kind of leader in person. We got some other notes here around redefining rigor, right? We hear a lot about rigor. What does that really mean? What does it mean, and how do we redefine that, right? We would say that everything that we're doing is probably more rigorous than what's typically viewed as rigorous, because we're focusing on building soft skills and additional skills that go alongside of these things. So being able to redefine those things. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll let Ari speak, is I think really in this moment, freeing up the innovators within your buildings and in your spaces and really protecting them. Give them, no one knows how to do what we're doing. No one's been taught how to do this distance learning thing. Students definitely aren't prepared to learn that way. Let the innovators and the people, the creatives, the people who want to try some new things, let them try it, and protect them as they're trying it, right? Because once you start trying to do some of those things, you can end up with a target on your back. So how are you going to protect those people and give them that space to be creatives? And if some of those things start to pick up and show that they can be yield positive results, really just protecting that and trying to push that further. But it starts by giving people that space to do that, because what we're doing is not working right now. Whether we're talking distance learning or currently, right? Particularly where we're at, right? The achievement gap is one of the highest in the country here in Minnesota. And so we know that what we're doing is failing. Who's going to be courageous enough to try something different? Even if it doesn't work, that's okay. And we're fortunate enough to be working with administrators and a principal who's all in on that. It's fine if it doesn't work. What we're doing is not working. So let's try something different. And if it doesn't work, cool, but at least we tried. And I think so leaders and districts need to be willing to step out on that limb and say, we're going to give it a shot. Go ahead, Ari.
Yeah. And I think, man, that rigor question has been one of the hardest narratives to combat with the teaching force, the educator force. CCA is not rigorous enough. Like, what are they doing in there? It's not, because it's not traditional and we're evaluating skills and, they're thinking that it's not rigorous enough. So we had to explicitly redefine what rigor was in our context. And I think that districts doing that would be super helpful when you're trying to overhaul the curriculum. You have to know what your definition of rigor is. But one of, I think an impediment to innovation, especially in spaces like ours, when we want to get students out of the building, man, seat time is such a hard, we have very strict, I don't know if this is true for all districts or all states. In Minnesota, it's a state rule. Seat time is such an impediment to getting students out of the building, and, community experts, people in our community to give credit or to align projects that are, in the field. So for instance, if the student goes out to North News, it's almost impossible to get that student credit for English in Minneapolis public schools. And so seat time, if you're a district person, advocate for, seat time changes, so it's not as restrictive for giving credit for students who are doing dope stuff in our community with dope people in our community. Yeah, so that's one of the main things I think, like for districts, and then everything that Alex said, freeing up innovators and leaders in your building. I feel like districts can be really restrictive and prescriptive, and so creating leaders in your building to share their learning and their innovation is super helpful too, because I don't necessarily think that we don't look at educators as leaders necessarily as a system, and so I think thinking about our educators as leaders is important to make change.
Allowing for some more teacher-powered spaces. And I would say overall, expanding our concept of education, right? Like we have this very narrow view that's focused on academics, right? Yeah. And I've always taken issue with that term academics, because education to me is broad. Education can happen anywhere. And so, you know, if we got kids doing internships, like what they're doing is most likely aligned to some standard. Allow us to utilize that standard to give them credit for what it is that they're doing. Education's always happening, right? And we have to be able to, so I just wanted to reiterate that. We have to be able to relax some of those restrictions that allow us to provide for that credit. And we understand what underlies that, right? It's an attempt to continue to protect the profession of teaching, which I understand. But we have to be aware of where we're simply maintaining the status quo and propping up the same old, right? And so, you know, so we have to be able to address that as well.
People that don't want to move forward need to feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we were talking about this yesterday, and I think principals have a lot of power in the system. I think they have the most power in the system to affect change. And I think that principals need to make people that don't want to move forward super uncomfortable with how they're behaving to whatever it may be, to protect their fragility, to protect the status quo. So however you can make those people feel uncomfortable is ideal, to create space. Because there are people in our school that, you know, don't agree with what we're doing and don't agree with the, you know, necessarily like our philosophy of teaching, you know, and I think that we have equity at the center of our school, and our students and families at the center. And those haters need to be, you know, I don't know, they need to be made pretty uncomfortable. So, and that's part of the
names. Call them out. We need names.
Not today.
Yes, next time you're on the show, we'll have that conversation. Yes. Wow. Well, Arielle, Rocca, Alex, Leonard, thank you both for being with us today. I think, you know, I'm sure I'm speaking for Manuel. It feels like we could have this conversation for hours and hours. And I think maybe at some point it'd be great to have you back, maybe as we get further into next school year, and you know, and have a little more perspective on kind of how things are going or not going, and you know, where the momentum is around, you know, making our profession one that is anti-racist, and the institution of school one that is anti-racist. But really appreciate your thoughts today. I think you know, not only just philosophically hearing your thoughts, but also hearing on the ground what's happening, you know, in the epicenter of this national movement around racial justice is just incredibly powerful. If folks are interested in learning more about Community Connected Academy at Patrick Henry High School in Minneapolis, and just understanding more about your model or supporting your school, where can they go to connect?
Yeah, so you could Google Community Connected Academy at Henry High School, and there'll be a link there to connect to our website. And you can always feel free to connect with Alex and I via email. It'll be on the website, I think. And so feel free to reach out. We're always looking for collaborators, innovators, people to come visit. So reach out. This is our logo. If you ever see this, Community Connected Academy.
Dope.
Students did this. Yeah. I had to have the crown to dig it.
Student design, student printed. They printed the shirts too.
Nice.
So.
Maybe we can get you to some. Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll hook you up.
Hell yeah. Nice. We'll drop those links under this episode for anybody watching or anybody listening. Our website will have all those links too. If you don't want to do the Googles, we'll provide those links for you.
Awesome.
Sweet.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, Alex and Arielle. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And folks, next up is today's Class Dismissed. Stay tuned.
All right, folks, we have reached that part of the episode where we give shout outs to folks doing great work out there in the world of education. For today's Class Dismissed, Jeff, what do we have?
Well, Manuel, we have, a heartfelt story, one that I think has struck a nerve, I think, for a lot of educators across the country. And in all these debates taking place this summer about, should we reopen physical school? Should we stay in a virtual mode, has really been a sobering story to a lot of educators. And this story comes to us from the Phoenix area and involves the passing of a teacher, Kimberley Chavez Lopez Byrd, who taught in the Hayden-Winkleman Unified School District, which is just outside of the Phoenix area. She was a teacher there for 38 years, elementary school teacher, who was teaching summer school this year. And summer school was virtual for the students, but staff was reporting to the school campus, and she shared a classroom with two other teachers. All three of those teachers wound up testing positive for coronavirus. And unfortunately, Kimberley became ill pretty quickly, wound up going on a ventilator and never came off the ventilator, passed away in late June. She did have asthma and some other underlying health conditions, but was reported to have been someone who was very, religious about following CDC guidelines and sanitizing and wearing a mask and social distancing, all of that. So this is just a tough story, Manuel, because we are, educators are not immune to this virus. And even in, certainly what could be thought of as a much more ideal situation than having a classroom full of students, right? Even in this situation, just a few adults being able to be 6 feet apart in a shared space. We see the spread of the virus, with folks who are following the rules. So this is a tough one. We definitely send our condolences out to Kimberly's family, to the staff at her school and in her district. And, what a loss, 38 years of service to the kids and the community there.
Yeah, man. Yeah. 38 years. She should have been able to retire and live out her retirement and enjoy. And you just think about how many young folks she must have interacted with across those 38 years. And you think of all the other educators out there who we've lost during this pandemic. I remember coming across something on Twitter that listed out all the educators in New York City who had passed during the epidemic, and it was just a really long list. We're losing a lot of folks, and here's a situation where it was just 3 adults in a room following the procedures and still couldn't contain the thing and keep it out. So sad, such a tragic loss. Condolences to her and her family and all the other families out there who have lost loved ones during this very difficult time. All right, folks, that about does it for this episode of All of the Above, and we'll catch you next week with a passing period. All right, stay safe out there. See you.